to another episode of Debating Metal. As always, I'm Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, and my co-host is Chris K. When it comes to worst to first episodes, a lot of them are going to be about classic bands. This one is no different. But what sets this band apart from all the rest is this band is the true definition of heavy metal. This band is Judas Priest.
19 studio albums, 6 live albums, 12 compilations, among other releases. Judas Priest has sold over 50 million records worldwide, with 12 million in the US alone. With their recording career now in its 50th year, Judas Priest has been one of the most defining bands in the world of heavy metal. The band established themselves with the twin axe attack of Glen, Tipton, and K.K. Downing, Rob Halford's uncompromising lyrics, and Ian Hill's reliable, steady rhythm. Though things have changed a few times in regard to the lineup, especially on the drums, the band has cemented their legacy in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. On this episode, Kenneth and I are going to rank the Metal Gods albums from what we think is their weakest, all the way up to what we believe is their very best.
And when we're finished with that, we're going to give you our big 4 Tim Ripper Owens albums. But before we begin, I just want to remind you that if you haven't done so already, please click subscribe or like on your favorite podcast platform and get our new episodes as soon as they are out. So now you can sit back, relax, turn it up to 11, and let the debate begin as we give you Judas Priest worst to first. 50 years now of Judas Priest, probably technically a little bit more because of, they're not a recording artist at this point, a couple years into their career. But 50 years of recording, man, that's just crazy.
It is pretty crazy. Obviously, they had their time before, and, there's really 2 different Judas Priests. I mean, the Al Atkins era was really a different band, technically. So I typically don't include that, even though, they did record some songs from that lineup. But one thing you may have noticed when we were talking at the beginning, Kenneth said, the big 4 Tim Ripper Owens albums. So we're actually not going to be including the 2 Tim Ripper Owens albums in our worst to first. And the reason for that is, there's the drama behind them not having those albums out to the public at the time. And that has a lot to do with how Rob Halford feels about the band. So I thought it would be a fun idea to, basically have 2 worst to first. It's our big 4 Tim Ripper Owens albums, but it's specifically going to be the Judas Priest 2 albums and then KK's Priest 2 albums.
Look, let's be honest. We don't want to offend Rob. We like Rob, and we hope that Rob likes us. We just don't want to piss him off. So, I agree with that, but, to some degree, just only because in reality, look, they can sit there and claim it's Judas Priest all they want. Okay. It was the 4 guys that were at the moment Judas Priest, Glen Tipton, K.K. Downing, Ian Hill, Scott Travis had returned after leaving the band and joined Rob Halford's fight. He came back to join Priest, and they brought in Ripper Owens. It sounded like Priest. It was great. They had to change the logo, so they couldn't use that on the albums. So it was just different. There was a different vibe. They tried to play the same style of music, but even Ripper was kind of more. He was trying to be growly in some cases, and in other cases, he was trying to be more of Rob. So it's best that we don't include it in this particular case. I like the fact that we're going to do a big 4 of Ripper Owens, and so that'll be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun.
I think so too. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through each album, and I believe there are, what do we say? There's 17 Rob Halford studio albums.
Yes.
And so we're going to go back and forth. So you're going to tell your number 17, defend your pick, and then I'm going to take my number 17, defend my pick, and we're going to go from there all the way up to number 1. All right? So do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
No, I'll go first.
All right, you go first.
All right. So starting with my number 17, I'm going to go with Rock-a-Rolla. I'm just not that big a fan of blues rock. It's, it's decent as far as that kind of stuff goes. I didn't really listen to it and feel like I hated anything. It's just not my type of music. So, I did find one song that I actually really liked, and that was "Run of the Mill." It's track 8 on the album. Um, I kind of liked Rockarola itself. It's decent, and like I can see the merit in some of the other songs, but it's just not really for me. So my favorite song on the album was "Run of the Mill," like I said, and the worst to me was "Cheater." Um, Production was kind of poor. I think John Hinch, decent drummer, so I think that was the only album with him on it, and I'm fine with that because I'm glad they really changed their style. But for me, definitely sits at the very bottom.
You know, I did not put that one at number 17, but it's not too far away.
Okay.
So I will mention what I think about it in a few, because I do have a couple of things to say about it. Uh, but my number 17 is actually, and I'm pretty sure you know what it is Nostradamus. Okay. And look, I'm sure there's plenty of fans out there, Judas Priest fans and debating metal fans, that will sit there and say, that's a great album. This, that, I think, look, there are people who love Saint Anger out there. I don't necessarily love Saint Anger. I still think it's a good album, but I don't love Saint Anger. Okay. There are people out there who love Nostradamus, and I'm just not one of them. For literally for me, there is absolutely no redeeming value of this for this album whatsoever. And except one song, I like one song, and that's "Prophecy," which is basically the lead track. It was after the first intro music that played, and that was it.
So what do you think is your least favorite track, or are you even able to turn that?
I don't know how many are there. There are like 19 on that album or something like that.
It's well, so here, and I'll talk more about it when we get to my part of it. But I kind of discounted any of the like filler songs that were like lead ins and transitions and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, like real songs, there's probably 10 or maybe 13 or so, like somewhere between there. And then there's a shit ton of transition pieces.
Yeah, I mean, there's 23 total tracks. There's 2 discs, right? And the of the 23 tracks, probably half of them are those transition tracks, ambient tracks, whatever the hell you want to call them. And it's just, I mean, look, I like Nostradamus. I like the whole concept and idea. I just think
It's not for you.
no, it's not for me. But especially coming off of uh, such a strong reunion album, if you want to look at it that way, where Rob came back to the band,
Mhm.
it was like to me such a letdown.
Yeah.
It's like, oh God, I mean, it's really hard to say because I can't even compare it to like Iron Maiden. Well, think about it. All right, imagine, you know, uh, Kiss comes out with Destroyers, their biggest album, right? And then all of a sudden their next album is The Elder. I mean, look at it like that,
Yeah. No, I
you
get
know?
that.
And so that's the way I felt about it. And I listened to it and I tried to listen to it and it's just like, man, I can't get past all this shit. And I've learned to accept Iron Maiden's matter of life and death. Okay. So, I can come a long way. But this wasn't doing it for me at all.
Fair enough.
All right. What do you got for 16?
So my number 16 is Stained Class. I've never been a big fan of that album. Again, it's just not really for me. Like, especially, coming off of Sin After Sin. And I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, Sin After Sin.
Sin After Sin, as well as Sad Wings of Destiny. And I'll get to those later, obviously. But um, to me, it was a step down. Like, I like Exciter. I like Beyond the Realms of Death. Everything else is fine. Like, and that's really how I feel about it. Like, it's just fine. Um, Les Bink's drumming is actually really good. I do like that aspect of it. My favorite song on the album was Beyond the Realms of Death, and then my worst song was Invader. I just don't really care for it. So for me, it's just like I'm not finding anything that I hate, but I'm just kind of bored. And to me, sometimes that's worse than like feeling passionate about it, you know? So yeah, it's fine.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that one. That's for sure.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I can tell you that I was not expecting that, because I had that ranked a little bit higher, and we'll talk about it when I get there. But for my number 16, I'm going with Rockarola. Much like you, it's such a different album. I mean, it's the beginning of Judas Priest's career. I mean, that right there is enough said. You know, you can take almost every band that has come out and you look at their first album and their fifth or sixth album is relatively different. You know, I mean, it may be in the same style, but you know, production is better. You know, the songs typically tend to be a more in depth, a little bit more creative. But you know, in some bands now, other bands, you know, they shot their wad on the first album. But
Yeah.
as we were talking about off the air, Rockarola, for what it was in 1974, not bad. And I tell you what, I'll Kiss's first album that came out that same year is probably heavier than this one.
No, it is.
So
Definitely.
that tells you a lot about what rock and roll is. But rock and roll to me, the album it's not a rough listen to, but it's that was the style of 1974. I mean, the only band that was heavier was Black Sabbath, really.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe someone could sit there and say Led Zeppelin was a little heavier by this time, but because they had already what they're going into. Was it the song remains the same? I think it was came out the year after this, and the
Yeah.
year the year before that was, or 2 years before that was the fourth album. So you know, rock and roll it is what it is at that time. What's really cool about rock and roll is that later on Hero was released, and that all the songs were remixed. I think that came out around the time of British Steel,
Yeah.
and so that was remixed. So the remix is kind of made the songs a little heavier, but you still can't change the fact that the tones were what the tones are. So if they tried to, you know, give you a little bit more bass, you know, turn the knobs up a little bit, that's all they could do. They could, you know, if they're going to run it through processors, it was going to change the whole sound. So they couldn't do that. You know, it wasn't a remix like, you know, you're going from heavy metal to an industrial metal mix. They were just trying to capitalize on the popularity of Priest. But so those are technically slightly heavier in sound, and they actually rearranged the verses of Rockarola, the song, around, and I don't know if it made it more cohesive or what, but they changed the first and second verse, and they swapped them, which is interesting. When you listen to the two, you could tell the difference. For
Yeah. I
me,
mean,
oh no,
I don't even think they were going for heavy at that point. They were just a blues rock band, you
right,
know.
yeah, exactly.
There was no
Um,
heavy, you know.
right,
Really.
exactly. You know, like when I listen to Rob Halford's book, you know, like I do audiobooks rather than read them.
Mhm.
I remember him saying, he goes, you know, our first heavy metal album. And I'm like, yeah, Rob, that was definitely not a phrase that came out of your mouth in 1974.
No.
Okay. Probably not until like 1978 did you maybe mention heavy metal. But anyway, for me, my favorite song on the album is it's either Rock and Rolla or Never Satisfied. Like you, pretty much every other song after that, except maybe Run of the Mill, that is a pretty good song too. Everything else wasn't, it just wasn't there for me. But I like Never Satisfied. Armored Saint did a killer cover on their nod to the old school of Never Satisfied. So that's a really if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, take a listen to that song. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, and Priest actually, I think if I'm not mistaken, brought that song back into their set in recent years. You know, I guess was the last 10 years or so, 10,
Mhm.
15. And so it's gone in and out of the set from time to time. So what's your number 15?
So my number 15 is Point of Entry. Um, to me, Point of Entry was a huge step down, and you know, you're hearing British Steel. The follow up is, you know, kind of 3-4 steps back as far as style. British Steel isn't amazingly heavy, but it's kind of like the blueprint of what they would do later on, and really started, garnering that metallic sound. And Point of Entry was like kind of stepping back into almost the bluesy sound. There are a couple tracks I really like on the album, though. Like, I really like Heading Out to the Highway and Desert Plains. Desert Plains being my favorite on the album. Not a big fan of Turning Circles. There's a few songs, like, I think Hot Rockin's kind of silly, but at the same time, it's a cool song. So it's fun. One like that grew on me over time, and I hate to say it, is You Say Yes. It's just that you say yes, I say no. Like, it's so stupid, but it's one of those like that. It just gets stuck in your head, and you go, "Okay, well, this is cheesy as hell, but it's fine." Um, you know, Early Dave Holland albums, so it's still like it fits the style. Dave Holland's not my favorite Judas Priest drummer by any means, but there was an era where his drumming worked, and these first couple albums, I would say for sure. So, I don't hate it as much as a lot of people do, because I do think it does have a few standout songs on it, but it still, sits at number 15.
Okay. I mean, I can see your point of entry, but it's not there for me yet. It's not there for me yet. My number 15 is going to be Ram It Down.
Okay.
And as soon as I heard the bridge hit in the title track, Ram It Down, it was over. It just like they lost me. And I was like, what the hell happened here? Because the song itself is really good. Ram It Down, the song, you take the bridge out of that song and you go straight from the chorus into maybe, let's say, a musical interlude that is reminiscent of what the chord structure is going to be during the guitar solo, and go straight into the solo from there, and then come out into a chorus or maybe a next verse or whatever. The song is 100 times better. But they blew it by throwing in a bridge that changed the pitch, it changed the key, and I was like, you know what? Fuck you. You lost me on this one. I said, what happened? Because it was also very light in that regards. And so I'm looking for a band who's trying to get back into that heavy metal, all coming off of Turbo, and then they throw in a really good song, and then they put that bridge in there, and I'm like, man, they just shit all over themselves. And for me, it didn't get any better. I mean, the songs are the type, besides the titles being so cliche, heavy metal, hard as iron, I'm a rocker, love you to death, monsters of rock. I mean, it's like, come on, dude.
So what's your favorite song on the album?
I mean, if it's going to be any of these songs that are on there, it's going to be Ram It Down. Okay. I have been, I did listen to the album a little bit. I am a little partial, maybe more to heavy metal, because it's not a bad song. But it's going to be between those two songs. The worst one, God, it's anything on side 2 except for Johnny Be Good. I actually think Johnny Be Good's a cool version, a cool cover. It's such a different type of cover compared to what the original was, that it's not horrible to me, but I know people think of it as almost sacrilegious to do a song like that, and think that it was okay. But they were told to make a single for it, and they did, because I think it was on a movie soundtrack. I can't remember which movie it was. I know that the movie starred Anthony Michael Hall. That was Johnny Be Good.
Oh, the movie was Johnny.
The movie was Johnny Be Good. Okay. And it starred Robert Downey Jr.
I can see how you would confuse them, because they were so kind of like entwined in their early.
No, Anthony Michael Hall's in the movie. He's the main star.
Oh, okay. Robert Downey Jr. They did a few things together. They did Saturday Night Live together as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, for me, so Johnny Be Good, I don't have a problem with it. If you're talking about the era that they're in, you're talking about the fact that they're a semi-electronic band in some cases because of Turbo. You know, John, coming out with this screaming version of Johnny Be Good. Okay, if it's the '80s, they basically succumbed to the the '80s, basically, in a nutshell. And it was it was one of those things where they lost themselves in that whole era. But I will say this about the album: probably some of their heaviest riffs are on that album. Unfortunately, the melodies that went along with those riffs did not help the songs. So,
All right. Well, my number 14 is also Ram It Down. So I will say that it's definitely Drum Machine's best drum or drumming on the
well, it's what's his face is Dave Holland's best performance, and all he did was press a button.
So Drum Machine did a good job.
Yes.
But that being said, I kind of agree with you on a lot of accounts. I think Ram It Down's a pretty decent song. I actually like Blood Red Skies quite a bit. Hard as Iron is okay. My biggest problem is I just don't like the mixing. I don't like the guitar tone at all. I think, for me, I'm kind of like leaning back and forth while I'm doing this between Ram It Down and Point of Entry, 14, 15. And I guess I like 3 songs versus 2 songs. So it's kind of like, okay, whatever.
I agree with you. Blood Red Skies is a pretty decent song,
Yeah.
but I mean they have better ballads if you want to look at it
And
like that.
I think there are better versions of Blood Red Skies too, like the live version from it was during the reunion. That one's really cool. So but I like the version that's on the album because I'm good with 80s music, like Top Gun soundtrack, kind of stuff. I'm good with that. Like, it doesn't bother me, but I don't feel as strongly about Johnny Be Good as you do. I think it's the worst song on the album. I think if it was its own single separately, it would be fine, but it's in the context of this album that's, like you said, kind of heavy and has this, certain sound to it, and it doesn't feel like it belongs on there. Like, it's just in the middle of it, and it doesn't make sense. And I'm just not a big fan of the song as a whole, like just Johnny Be Good. Maybe because, just how many times I've heard it and it's been in so many things, etc. There's so many covers of it, and it just doesn't really do a whole lot for me. Like, I think the best version of it is from Back to the Future. So, but like in the context of the album, I think it's garbage.
Well,
But
what's sad about that is that it was released as a single. That was the first single on the album,
Mhm.
and so it comes out a month ahead of the album, and it's obviously there to promote the movie. But it shouldn't have been the third song on side 2. It should have been the last song on the album.
Yeah,
Make it one of those things.
then it feels like it's not just disjointed in a weird place. Put it as track 10 and it would have been fine. It wouldn't bother me. But, I'm the guy that listens to albums from beginning to end, so when I hear something that feels completely out of sequence, it bothers me. So,
Yeah, no, I understand that. I get that. Not a big deal. All
so
right.
what's your number 14?
My number 14 is Turbo. Coming, in 1982, I became a Judas Priest fan because of Another Thing Coming and the video that was on MTV. That video was played every like 45 minutes. It was just like, God damn, it's on all the time. But it was such a good song for a 13-year-old kid who's just got into metal or not got into metal, just got into Judas Priest, that it was like, this is amazing. And then, you're still, I'm an MTV fan, and all of a sudden, the next year you come across Defenders of the Faith, and the first song that gets released from Defenders is whatchamacallit, Free Wheel Burning. Great song. And then I went out of my way to learn the really fast part on the bridge for his singing. And I was like, man, that's really cool. And then I'm like, all right, when's the next album coming out? When's the next album coming out? So now I'm, I'm 15 when Defenders come out, and then I got to wait 2 years, literally 2 years, and Turbo comes out. And I was so excited for a new Judas Priest, and MTV's, it's going to be premiering this night and this and that thing. And then Locked In, the video for Locked In comes in, and I'm like, what the fuck is this?
I can imagine. Yeah.
And Locked In is not bad by itself. Turbo, the song, is not bad by itself. You put with those two videos, and it's like, what the stop? This is horrible. And so, and then you put the collective together. You put Turbo, and it's like, the thing about Turbo is it's got really good hooks all throughout the album. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Turbo Lover's got a good hook. Locked In's got a good hook. Private Property's got a cheesy but good hook. Parental Guidance has got like every cheese in the world, but it's a good hook, right? Rock You All Around the World. Out in the Cold, good song. It's a slow, methodical song. I like that song, right? Why they chose to open the concert with that, I have no idea. Wild Nights, Hot and Crazy Days, again, good hook. And then it went down from there. Hot for Love and Reckless, just like, those are just fillers to me. But it's just, it was so cheesy. I don't need your parental guidance, Private Property. I'm like, the only thing I ever really got into more was Turbo Lover and Locked In, and I'll put those on my playlist. I might even put, Private Property on my playlist from time to time if I feel comfortable, or, but Out in the Cold, that's it.
Safe space.
In my safe space. That's my safe space playlist. So, but yeah, that's it. I mean, nothing else. I mean, like I said, lots of melodies, lots of hooks, but it's just, to me, it could have been so much better.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so my number 13. My number 13 is Sin After Sin. This is another case of just the really early stuff just doesn't do it for me as much. I do find more to like on Sin After Sin than the ones that I mentioned before. Especially the cover of Diamonds and Rust, I think is just absolutely fantastic. Let Us Pray, Call for the Priest. Call for the Priest, my favorite song on the album. I actually really like that one a lot. That's one that, goes on any Judas Priest playlist for me. Dissident Aggressor. Always like that one too. Really cool closer for the album. It's just kind of the stuff in between that I'm not as much into. It's not really my heavy Judas Priest. But like for an album from 1977, I think it's pretty great. Like I said, Call for the Priest is my favorite song on the album. Here Come the Tears, probably my least favorite. Simon Phillips, I think he's at this point the best drummer that they've had. So
he's not even a regular drummer.
I know.
Yeah, he was just their session drummer for that.
Yeah, he did a great job on the album. So, I know it's number 13, but that to me says a lot for Judas Priest. Because, like, even though there's been songs that, like, Johnny Be Good that I'm not a big fan of, like, I would say even to this point, there's nothing I hate. There's other worst to first that we've done where I'm just like, this song sucks, but so far I'm still, we're 5 albums in, and I'm like, yeah, everything's fine. Like, nothing has set me off where I'm like, this sucks.
I could sit there and say that for 16 albums. Nostradamus sucks to me.
Well, I haven't even mentioned that one yet.
So. I know that's even crazier to think. Number 13 for me is also Sin After Sin. Very raw album. Really, to me, it's got some very good, strong songs in there. I agree with you, Diamonds and Rust. I love Sinner. I mean, I was attracted to Sinner when I watched the MTV Judas Priest concert from what did they call it? It wasn't Nashville, Tennessee. Or was it? No, it was Memphis, Tennessee. And
Okay.
um, they that was the song that highlighted KK Downing and his guitar playing. So that was a really cool song. So I like that one. I like Diamonds, and oddly enough, I like Starbreaker a lot. I think that's a really cool song. It it, it has it's a relatively heavy riff, but the song itself is not crazy heavy. It's kind of weird in that way. So that's what it kind of attracts me to it.
Mm.
Um, I like Let Us Pray, Call for the Priest, and Distant Aggressor. It was one of those tracks that I really never paid attention to until Slayer did a cover, and then I went back and listened to it, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this is not bad.
You know what's funny about that? Like I had heard both songs, like both. I mean, it's the same song, right? But different versions. I had heard both versions and did not connect them at all. Like for
That's
for a
funny.
long time, like because I just didn't pay much of attention to this version of it. So
Right. So the cool thing about Sin After Sin for me is that it is the beginning of the trilogy of albums that really hit in the mid 70s for Judas Priest. And
mhm.
I know you had Stained Class a little bit lower, but Sin After Sin, Stained Class, and Hellbent for Leather or Killing Machine for our friends around the world, that trio of albums really were a group where the band was riding a wave that you could see that they were getting better and better and better. And we'll talk about that as each album comes along. You've already spoken about Stained Class, and for me, it's a little bit higher.
I for me, it's like the stuff that they released on Unleashed in the East. I think is better, and so like when I think of a lot of those songs, I kind of defer to that version of it.
Yeah, and that's very similar to how Kiss Alive, where the
Yeah,
songs are so much better,
that's a
or
fair
Light,
comparison.
or was it Strangers in the Night from UFO? Same thing.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it definitely, I mean, Unleashed in the East is what pushed Judas Priest, into the British Steel era, and it helped them solidify themselves because now you can tell, much like it did for Kiss, you know, this is what they sound like in concert. So those songs may not be produced very well or sound very great production wise, but man, live they kick ass.
Yeah,
So
way better. Like, there's a couple songs we haven't talked about yet that appear on Unleashed in the East, and it kind of changed my perception of those songs because it's a more metal version, and it's kind of like that tipping point where they're about to go into British Steel, and their sound is changing. And for me, like, it really helps some of those old songs.
yep.
All right, so my number 12 is Redeemer of Souls. Um, when this album came out, like I guess the first couple singles, I really can't remember the order, but I remember hearing Redeemer of Souls, and I was like, man, this is really cool. Like, we had basically heard that Judas Priest was dissolving. KK had decided to retire. All the drama that went along with that. And then Richie Faulkner comes in, kind of revitalizes the band, and this is that turning point where they're so excited they're releasing a new version of it, or I mean not new version, a new album. And so this is the first version of the band with Richie Faulkner, and I thought it was fine. The first four songs I thought were great: Dragonaut, Redeemer of Souls, Halls of Valhalla, and Sword of Damocles. So I'm four songs in, I'm like, this kicks ass. Then we got to the rest of the album, and I was like, not impressed and kind of bored through most of it. And especially like if you had the deluxe edition, which I'm not really kind of including those songs, but I do feel like it's of note because this is really the only one that has a deluxe edition in their entire catalog. And I'm not referring to like re-releases or anything like that. Like this was in the era of, bonus tracks, and so they have five songs, and eventually those got released on the Five Souls EP. But 18 songs in, if you got the uh, deluxe edition, and I'm just bored through most of the album. And so, like, if you just take into the account like that first side, the first four tracks, like, awesome. Um, Halls of Valhalla, definitely my favorite song on the album. for me, March of the Damned, like this cheesy ass lyrics, I mean, it's like Rob Halford at whatever age he was in 2014, like 60 something years old, is a young angsty teen, and I'm just like, this sucks.
Well,
So
because he had to dumb his lyrics down to Richie Faulkner's age.
even then, Richie Faulkner's not that young.
I
So
know.
like, that's one of the few songs. Like, I know it appeals to some people, and more power to you, but for me, it's yeah. But yeah, like of the reunion era of this band, like the Richie Faulkner era, I think it's the weakest for sure.
At the time, he was 34, just so you know.
Very young and angsty,
Compared to Rob, yeah.
right?
Or to Ian Hill.
Yeah. Oh God.
All
Ian
right.
Hill has been old since day one of the
I
band.
know, right? All right. Number 12 for me is Point of Entry. And
Okay.
um, Point of Entry, much like, like you were just talking about, is just not a strong album. I mean, that album could possibly have derailed their career. That's how,
I would agree with that 100%.
coming off such a strong album like British Steel, that could possibly have derailed their career. Much like they're coming off of Retribution, and they released Nostradamus, that almost shut them down. Okay,
It's almost like, in perception wise, like if you'd never heard of Judas Priest at that point, and there was a fair amount of people that just weren't aware of them. British Steel comes out and is almost like Cowboys from Hell in a way, where it's like, yeah, the band released some stuff before it, but perception wise, like there was a new audience for it, right? So Point of Entry is kind of at that point like a sophomore album, and it's
right,
a huge
exactly,
flop.
and it,
Yeah.
it could have derailed their career, but they had, in my opinion, and yours were a little different. In my opinion, they had three strong songs that was able to carry it enough, basically carry it to the finish line to get them into the studio to do Screaming for Vengeance. And they knew when they started recording Vengeance that Point of Entry was weak. So they knew they had to come up with something good.
Oh,
So,
big time, yeah.
and the three songs that I'm talking about, Heading Out to the Highway, like you said, Desert Plains, like you said, and I go with Hot Rockin' because they had that video. It's cheesy. It's absolutely cheesy.
Well,
But this
like I
is
said, it's still a good song.
right.
Like,
It's
yeah.
1981. This is the style, and so if you think about the video for Breaking the Law from British Steel, right? You see them, and they're literally driving, a car, and they're all in it, and now they're all working out and hot rocking together, and when you know about Rob now, it just kind of like, oh, makes sense.
Yeah, right.
So it's just kind of funny that way. Desert Plains, my favorite Judas Priest song, period, hands down. So
That's a
you
great
know,
song.
yeah, and heading out to the highway, man, one of the best riffs that they've ever put on tape, and it's so good. So that song itself, that and Desert Plains, just carried that song and gave them enough momentum to go back out on tour and support the album and basically put Priest's name out there again, after British Steel. So that was a good thing, and that helped get them to Vengeance. So,
Okay, I can agree with that.
all right. So what's your number 11?
All right, so my number 11 is Killing Machine, or Hellbent for Leather. Um, it's probably, it's one of those albums that I struggled with for a long time, because for the first half of the album, um, I'm not into a lot of the songs. Like, I like Hellbent for Leather a lot, and then it's the second half of the album that really gets me. Like, Green Manalishi, that covers really good. And I'm a Fleetwood Mac fan, so I mean, even the Peter Green era, which this one's from. So I like that one a lot. Um, Killing Machine, really good song. That was a Glen Tipton track that he pretty much solely wrote. Running Wild is really cool. Before the Dawn, I think that's a great track as well. Evil Fantasies though lost me. I'm not a big fan of that closer. Um, so my favorite song on the album is Hellbent for Leather. And then it's funny because Rob, is a animal lover and he's against leather now, so he jokingly calls it Hellbent for Pleather, um, which is just great. But the worst song on the album for me is Evil Fantasies. And Les Binks really shows like he's a great drummer here. So definitely enjoy this one.
For me, my number 11 is the same thing: Killing Machine, Hellbent for Leather.
Okay.
Like I said, there was the 3 albums that came out consecutively. Sin After Sin, Stained Class, Hellbent for Leather. This is the 3rd of those albums. It's a pretty strong follow up for the album after Stained Class. I like Delivering the Goods. I like Rock Forever. Evening Stars, that's a weird one. I mean, that's definitely like a 70s classic rock track almost.
Yeah, for sure.
But then you put on Hellbent for Leather, and it's like, whoa. You go from Evening Star to Hellbent for Leather, and it's like that's just completely 2 different bands almost. But Green Man Leashy, great cover. Killing Machine, great song. Running Wild, I mean, the Unleashed in the East version is amazing.
That's yes, and I wanted to bring that up, so I'm really glad you did. Like that's one of those songs that like when I heard the Unleashed in the East version, I'm like, God damn, that's awesome.
Right, exactly. And so and that's the reason why for me this album is pretty strong. It was to me a bit better than Sin After Sin because it was the 3rd of the trilogy, if you want to put it that way, in my opinion. Sin, with Sin After Sin being the first one, and Stained Class being in the middle, but I still think, and we'll talk about it in a bit. Stained Class was better. But, you had your opinion, I had mine. So, but I liked a lot about, in my opinion, Hellbent for Leather. For our European and friends across the world, Killing Machine. I think they've since changed it to officially be Hellbent for Leather in the United States. Excuse me, Killing Machine, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean it was a technicality because of the just couldn't put Killing Machine on the shelf at that time in the U.S.
Well, in the U.S. because the Hellbent for Leather, the song was not actually on the album when it was released internationally, and then only in the U.S. and then they added it later on. So that's an interesting thing. And the Green Man Leashy version, since you mentioned it before, Peter Green era, I had no idea that this was Fleetwood Mac at the time. And when I heard about it, I still to this day haven't heard the original version. And I've tried to, and something's always stopped me from listening to it. I don't know why. But, I mean, they have totally taken this song and made it theirs.
It's funny, like those early albums, they always have a cover, and they always do a really great job with it.
Yep.
It's just Johnny Be Good. That's the problem. I'm just playing. Like it's not like I said, it's not that bad. It's just on the album it bothers me.
All right,
All
number
right.
10 for you.
Number 10 is your number 17, Nostradamus. I am more open to like rock operas and concept albums in some ways. I know there's some you like, but we've talked about them in the past where, I kind of like that kind of stuff, and I enjoyed the story that was being told here. They got a little bit up their own ass on this one for sure. But I enjoyed it. Like Prophecy, I think, is a really cool song. Revelations as well. Pestilence and Plague, like, give that one another chance. It's a really cool song.
I refuse.
Alone's really cool, and Nostradamus, the second to last track on the album. To me, the worst is all the like extended transitions. Like there's some of them that drag on a bit too long. Example being Sands of Time and Peace. that's they're fine, but they did drag on a bit too long. The production's really nice, and there's definitely this is a project and not the typical album, and I totally get why people don't like it. I mean, it's just if you're used to Judas Priest and you're listening to, especially all the different eras. I mean, there's the 70s era, there's the metal era that kind of starts with British Steel. And then there's, the reunion era, there's all these different things that are going on. And I say reunion era because Rob Halford comes back into the band, right? So that's really what I'm referring to. And then now there's the Richie Faulkner era, and so I get like why this doesn't really fit in with a lot of the other stuff, but like neither did Elder, and I enjoyed Elder too. So I enjoyed it. I remember it coming out, and I listened to it several times. I had the 2-disc version. My buddy had the record, which I think was 4 discs, or maybe not 4 records. I mean, I I thought it was cool.
Yeah, not me. Yeah, and they still call records discs from time to time.
Gotcha.
Somebody will. It's just look. This goes to tell you this little bit of information I'm going to say goes to tell you everything you need to know about Nostradamus to some extent. It was produced by Glen Tipton and KK Downing. Like there was no outside producer.
Yeah, they definitely got up their own ass.
Dude, they were sniffing farts. Like, oh my god.
We're geniuses.
Yeah, I mean,
and to some degree, I agree. But yeah,
I mean, going from Roy Z on Angel of Retribution to we're going to do this one ourselves because our farts smell really good. It's just I don't know. I lost it. All right, number 10 for me is the third album in the trilogy, which is Stained Class. You put that really down. I think it's the best of the 3 albums when it comes to that Sin After Sin, Stained Class, and Killing Machine. The songs that you felt were kind of weak, like I liked Exciter. And then being able to then hear such a high energy version on Unleashed in the East just kind of made me like the song a little bit more.
Well, Exciter was one of my favorites on the album.
Right. Okay. Better by You, Better Than Me. Really cool song. I mean, it's a cover of Spooky Tooth. Very, very cool song. I like Stained Class. It's not the best song on the album, but I like the song. Beyond the Realms of Death, hands down, my favorite song on the album.
Agreed. Yeah.
I love that. That's probably, top 3 for me. Maybe, it could be 2 or 3, depending on how I feel, because Desert Plains is always going to be number 1. But yeah, I love that, and I really took an attraction to that song after the trial that they had, and that was one of the songs that was mentioned during the trial.
You're referring to the
trial where Judas Priest went on trial. The what?
Was it the PMRC or no?
No, they went on trial because some kid killed himself.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and so they
would have been around the time of what was it, like Jawbreaker and
exactly. Defenders of the Faith, 1984.
What was the song? It was Eat Me Alive, right?
Yeah,
it
was Eat Me Alive. Yeah, so this was this trial happened. If I'm not mistaken, this happened before, like only a couple years before. It was a 1990 trial where the kid committed suicide after listening to Stained Class. Of the album, the whole album.
Yeah.
So, it was, it's unfortunate that someone did something like that, but it really did not have anything to do with the lyrics. And when someone does something like that, there's more trouble beyond just them listening to a Judas Priest or any kind of rock and roll album.
Yeah, and people are trying to make sense of them, and it happens.
Oh, always, because the kid wears a metal T-shirt, whatever T-shirt he happens to be wearing at that time, that's the band that they're going to accuse. And the kid could have 100 of them in his closet, but the one he's wearing, so if he happens to go out and be wearing a Beavis and Butthead shirt, then they're going to blame MTV.
Damn it, George Strait.
He's a country fan. So, but so for me, just that collection of songs was stronger than Sin After Sin. And to me, it was a little bit stronger than Hellbent for Leather Killing Machine.
Mm.
That I felt that this was the better album. Production wise, all three were relatively very similar. So I can't say anything about that. Les Binks was playing drums on this one. Les Binks played on Killing Machine as well, right?
Mm.
So he had his run with the band, and that's pretty much like he joined the band right after they released Sin After Sin. So that's he was part of that 3 tour package that they had going on for those 3 or 4 years. So to me, Stained Class was the strongest of those three.
Okay. All right. My number 9 is Sad Wings of Destiny. I really like Sad Wings a lot. I think it's a great album. This was one that from their early years that I didn't feel like didn't fit what I was interested in. If that makes sense. I think I double negative there, but what I mean is, so this has a really cool mood to it. Has It's closer to what I view Judas Priest as. Like, it's not as bluesy per se. It's starting to kind of feel that like um it's feeling more like along the lines of Black Sabbath of the era, I guess. Tracks like The Ripper, Dreamer, Deceiver, Tyrant, and I really like Island of Domination. The Ripper being my favorite. It's one of the first Judas Priest songs that I remember just kind of like gripping me. Um, Epitaph, probably my least favorite. I think it's still a really good song. So that kind of says what I feel about the album when my least favorite is still a good song. Um, but yeah, like I think of the early years, this is definitely my favorite, like of the 70s era of the band.
Oh yeah, I could see that, and I agree with you. It's also my number 9, and this is the album where Rob Halford established himself as, you know, not the metal god, not yet, but just the power in his voice,
Yeah,
between
he definitely feels more like the singer of the band. Like he's not doing as much material from the Al Adkins stuff, and he's finding his place.
right, and yet Victim of Change is an Al Atkins song, but he just makes it his own. He just tears that song up.
Hmm.
That's such a great song. That is probably like when we're talking about Beyond the Realms of Death, that Victim of Change is probably my number 2 in
Mm.
there. 2 or 3.
I'm not as big on it, but I really like the version from Unleashed. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love it just because you have that heavy intro that pretty much the main riff throughout the song, but then it goes into that little quiet part, and when he comes out and he's just hitting that high note to
Mhm.
go into like the guitar solo, that's just wild. I love that. So, and then then you follow it up with the Ripper, and then again with his voice the way it was just amazing. And then they come down to Dreamer, Deceiver, and Deceiver, and then they went again to Prelude and Tyrant. Tyrant's a great song. I love Tyrant. I also like Island of Domination. So I agree with you in all those things. You know, the my least favorite would be Epitaph.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I mean, this Sad Wings, and they, as much as the band disowns that album because they technically don't own it, but now they have made an agreement, so you're going to be seeing that included in the Judas Priest um, discography. That when they mention stuff, they finally have a working agreement because the company sold it to the same company that Judas Priest is working with their publishing.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're going to see Sad Wings and Rock and Roll be part of the actual discography where it's not going to be like the Bastard Childs anymore.
It's so
But
good to hear. Yeah.
I know, but a few years ago, whatever company that owned it, I think it was E1 Music, they released a really cool version of it on Record Store Day. It had an embossed cover. I believe it's I want to say it's one LP, but it's a gatefold album. It's such a cool cover, but and remastered. But Judas Priest had nothing to do with the remastering or anything like that. So anyhow, let's move on.
All right. My number 8 is Firepower. I like the album. I think it's pretty good. Definitely a step up from Redeemer of Souls for me. Firepower's great track. Lightning Strikes. Evil Never Dies. Rising from Ruins. No Surrender. And Sea of Red. I really like all of those. I think it has a little bit of a lull in the middle, which I'm fine with because it's not bad per se. Obviously I have it at number 8 above some of the others. So, but Firepower to me, the opening track I think is definitely my favorite. Never the Heroes, it's okay. Just not my favorite. And production's great. Richie Faulkner really, stepping up and filling that role well. Always love Scott Travis's drumming. Like he's definitely my favorite Judas Priest drummer.
I don't understand how you put him over Simon Phillips.
I put Simon Phillips above some of the other guys. So,
Well, I don't know how you put Scott above Drum Machine. Come on.
Drum Machine. Drum Machine is above Dave Holland.
That's so sad.
It's so funny because Dave Holland really is on some of the biggest albums that they ever released.
He did a really good job on Screaming for Vengeance.
He's just so boring.
Yes, he is. I mean, he was pretty fast on was it Free Will Burning? That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, those 2 albums are definitely his best. But
yes.
we'll get into that later. All right, so what's your number 8?
My number 8 is Redeemer of Souls. So for me, oddly enough, they redeemed themselves, pun intended, after Nostradamus. If you're gonna go from Angel of Retribution and shoot your wad with Nostradamus and almost ruin your comeback, to come back with Redeemer of Souls was pretty good. I mean, as a whole, it's not their greatest album, but I'm going to go ahead and put it up where I put it because, one, it was a good way to reestablish and reset everything. If you're going to give me half the album is pretty decent, I'm okay. If you're going to give me a third of the album, I'm good with that. Because if we're going to sit there and say Point of Entry carried itself based on 3 songs on a 10-song album, then if you give me 4 or 5 songs on a 13-song album, it's not too bad. Because I like Dragonaut, I like Redeemer of Souls, I like March of the Damned. Some of the lyrics are cheesy, but you know what? I still like the song itself. Sometimes I can look past the cheesy lyrics when they don't stand out so much. To me, they don't stand out a lot. I like the melodies more than the lyrics. And then what's the other one that I was listening to? Hell and Back. That's a pretty cool song. But Down in Flames, I like that song too. And that one I just added to my playlist. So if you're gonna give me 5 or 6 songs on an album, I can deal with that, because if we're gonna sit there and say that Point of Entry had 3 songs that carried the album, this is pretty good. And they've had some really bad songs like Solar Angels sucked on Point of Entry. But so this wasn't bad for me. And when I see an album that has bonus tracks and stuff like that, I only want it because I'm a completionist.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
I don't care if it's good or bad. I just want it because I'm a completionist. And you did mention before that this is one of the only albums that have a deluxe bonus track.
Yeah.
The new one has like 2 different editions. I think but all the bonus tracks are the same.
Yeah, it has 3 bonus tracks.
Yeah, 3 bonus tracks. So I got the Target version, which has got the hardcover.
Yes.
So with the bonus tracks, but the regular album out there doesn't have those 3 extra songs. So anyway, that's where I put Redeemer of Souls, and the big thing about that, from this point forward, we're more than halfway. Okay, so the albums are all going to be good. So now it's just a matter of how good we think one is over the other. to me, Redeemer of Souls is the beginning, and it's really weird to say it this way. It's their modern power metal albums that they're doing, right?
Mhm.
But from I would say from Defenders, or maybe even, well, I guess just this whole era that we're going to be talking about. I mean, they established themselves as a power metal band,
Mm.
and they have a different style than a lot of the European power metalers, but still, I mean, they are like the godfathers or the grandfathers before Manowar established that musical genre, if you want to put it that way.
So one the interesting thing to note, we're up to number 7 now, but everything below we mostly have in common, whether it's in the same place or not. The exceptions being you have turbo already, I don't, and then I listed firepower just now, and so everything else, it's funny enough we're relatively close.
Well, we have three exactly the same.
Yeah, yeah. Sad Wings of Destiny, Sin After Sin, and Killing Machine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my number 7 is one of those I just mentioned. It was Turbo. I when I first heard it, my experience obviously was way different because I was born in 1986 when this album came out. So I wasn't along for the ride in the 70s, etc. So it wasn't until years later that I even heard it. That being said, like I got into some 80s stuff, and this wasn't too far of a stretch from some of that. I am a case by case basis guy when it comes to albums. Like, just because I love a band doesn't mean I love every single album they put out. And, this was one that really took me off guard for sure, because I had been listening to the rest of their catalog, and I heard this and I'm like, this is different. But Turbo Lover, like, it's a really catchy, cool song. Locked In, I think, is a good song. Like, I know the music videos are garbage, but
The
like,
videos kill it for me.
right? And Hot for Love, I think, is cool. I like Reckless. But like, Parental Guidance is one of the worst songs that's ever been written. So, like,
But it's funny.
yeah,
It could turn into an earworm.
yeah, not for me. Um, an earworm, as in it's eating my brains out. So like there's some real garbage on here, but it's like it's cheesy fun, and I totally understand anybody that's like, that's not my Judas Priest. I hate this album. I love only the hardest of metal and stuff like that. But like, I don't know. Well, by the time I was listening to it, like I already missed most of the the early stuff. Like, by the time I got into Judas Priest, Rob had already left the band and was coming back basically. So for me, it's still a fun album.
You know what I think about? Now that the way you were talking about it, like, it came out in '86. It's in the middle '80s. I think if it had come out the year before,
Mm-hmm.
because Defenders came out in January of '84, so it took 26 months to release this album, and part of it had to do obviously with Rob going through some personal issues and stuff like that. But if it comes out in '85 with the hooks that it has on songs like Parental Guidance and Private Property, I think it's a bigger album. I,
Possibly.
I really do. Now, coming off of Defenders, the problem with it is that Defenders was such a good album and relatively heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Songs like, and we're going to talk about it, but so I don't want to say the songs right now, but the songs were so good, that Turbo was supposed to be just as good. And having to wait 2 years, I think, is really what it killed the momentum. But at the same time, it was like there was a transition. People were starting to move past the cheese. I mean,
Yeah.
because
It
at
was
this
a left
point,
turn too. Like it's another one of those, like, you just released British Steel, and then release point of entry. Like, so it's that same kind of thing happening.
Right. I mean, you think about the height of, 1986. You had Ozzy doing, the Ultimate Sin. So he's got the giant hair. Judas Priest got the giant hair now. Rob's hair is long during Turbo, which is one of the few times that his hair was that long. After having it so short for so long, and so in Iron Maiden, somewhere in time, so everyone's going electronic, everyone's going keyboards and stuff like that, and so much changed in metal. But then you have the flip side. You have bands like Anthrax. You have the Big Four: Anthrax, Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica, all putting out these really heavy albums. And it was such a dichotomy because those heavy bands are opening for these keyboard heavy bands now. It's a really weird thing that happened, and so that I think had a lot to do with where that goes down in the annals of history.
Yeah.
So that was your number 7, right? So my number 7 is Angel of Retribution. Like I mentioned, we're talking power metal albums now, and this is a reunion album coming off of the albums with Ripper. You've got 2 studio albums, 2 live albums with Ripper. Rob decides, can I come back? They have an amicable meeting. The band is back together. And I got to tell you, Angel of Retribution is a kick-ass album when it comes to when they put the band back together. So I like it a lot, and I should like it more, but I never got that into it. It's one of those weird things. I like Judas Rising. I like Revolution. I like Hellrider. And Deal with the Devil. Cool song. So it was one of those things where, all right, Judas Priest is back. They're doing it, because they got Rob back. So I enjoy this album a lot.
Me too. That's why I haven't spoken about it yet. All right. So my number 6 is probably one of the hot takes, along with like Turbo. Is my number 6 is British Steel. I know that's a lot of people's favorite album. I don't think it's as good as some of the stuff that followed, at least like for me. But the first 4 songs are absolutely great. Rapid Fire, awesome opener. Metal Gods is iconic. Breaking the Law is another one of those songs that like it's one of those that people just associate with the band, but it's my favorite of those, and I'll kind of mention a few of those in addition to that. But like Breaking the Law, Living After Midnight, those are they're to me they're like softer songs, but they're not like as heavy as some of the other stuff, but they're just iconic, right? But a Grinder, cool song. Funny enough, like what Grinder is now.
It wasn't different back then.
Yeah, right. United, not as big a fan of.
That's a cheesy song.
Yeah. You don't have to be old to be wise. I've never been a fan of. The Rage is okay. Living After Midnight, it's like a fun concert song to me, but to me it's not anything particularly special. I know that's sacrilege. People love it, and it's great in the context of a concert. But I never go out of my way to listen to it really. And then Steeler, I really like Steeler. So my favorite song on the album is Metal Gods, and then my least favorite is United because it's so damn cheesy.
It is. That's your number 6. All right. Well, my number 6 is Invincible Shield.
Okay.
We're getting up there. We're narrowing this down, just like you are. So there's only so many places that we could fit this album in, and not be number 1.
Yeah.
Look, you're coming off of Firepower, which universally hailed as a great album. I haven't even mentioned Firepower, and you have. Invincible Shield, I in my opinion, is not as good as Firepower. Production wise, equivalent, maybe a little bit better. Still has that Andy Sneap sound, but I believe if you're starting to listen to it, it's starting to slowly fade away from that sound.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think it has less of the Andy Sneap sound than Firepower does. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's good. And the other thing too is for a lot of this, sometimes it's just the system that you listen to it on. Because if you listen to it straight on the on your phone, like no headphones, just the speakers on your phone, it doesn't sound as mushy.
Mhm.
But when you listen to it on a full blown system, it's got a lot of extra bass on it because when a system that has a good subwoofer system, sound system on it, you're going to hear all that stuff that you can't typically hear.
Yeah.
Those frequencies are going to be picked up. So I think Invisible Shield's great. I mean, it literally just came out just a month or so ago. So it's for it to be that high, but that was one of the reasons why we waited for this episode to be out because we knew this album was coming. We heard a few songs ahead of time. Panic Attack is a really good song. Serpent and the King, Devil in Disguise, Crown of Horns. So and Trial by Fire. So here's the funny thing about this Crown of Horns song. If I'm not mistaken, that's the one where Michael Sweet from Stryper said that he was so proud of Rob to be able to come out and talk about a song of faith like that. And I'm like thinking to myself, is he listening to the same thing I am? Because I'm not. I mean, yes, if you look at the lyrics throughout this album, there's a lot of introspection in Rob, and there's a lot about life and death. I think more so than he typically does.
Mhm.
And there's a lot more of his personal beliefs in this because, Rob's been sober now for, what was it, 30 something years. And Rob has, he has his faith, and so there's a lot of contradictions in what he sings about and stuff like that. And that's because, one's a job and one, then there's your personal life. And Michael Sweet coming out and saying that, I just thought that was kind of odd because if you listen to the song right before it, he's talking about, getting on, his whatever, ride with me to the gates of hell. So, I just like, Mike, you didn't listen to the whole thing, did you? Okay. And it's not Crown of
But
Thorns,
but no, I mean, so yeah, there can be multiple interpretations of Crown of Horns. I mean, he talks about the end of longing and things like that. Where you know what is he referring to? Only he knows, right? So,
right.
and that's part of the fun of music is your interpretation of what the music is. And like Gates of Hell, I don't think is about like sinning so we're going to hell. It's like, ride with me, like even if we're going to hell, like we're gonna do it together, like
Right.
that kind of thing, right?
There's just I mean, it's all about how you interpret the song.
Yeah.
I just found it because, he's talking, the protagonist of the song Crown of Horns is talking about how he's, you know, wearing something like that. And I forgot what the line was.
I think it's to me the interpretation is like crown of horns, right? Like in tandem, like with the crown of thorns, right? Like obviously that's the reference there. But basically, he's been pegged as this like demonic person or shunned from society. I mean, obviously, Rob Halford has gone through things like having to the stigma of being gay in the metal community, which I think for the most part, in the modern age, like there's certainly less of a stigma there. And like his band was pretty always accepting of that, even though he was afraid to come out. If you read his book or listen to his book, like you really get a perspective of how he felt, even though, you know, he probably would have been accepted for the most part. Still, it was, difficult for that to happen. So the crown of horns being that imagery of, the perception of him. Like, is he an evil man? Is he a you know, a, a, a person that he really wasn't? So, That's kind of the interpretation I got from it.
Right. I mean, I look at it. You see the chorus is heavy as the crown of horns that rests upon this head. Heavy as the crown of horns from all the blood he shed. It's. I mean, just that last line from all the blood he shed, right, is where I believe
Mhm.
Michael Sweet is taking his interpretation. But when the line before or the two lines before that rests upon this head, he's talking about the protagonist of the song. So it's just a weird. And I'm only bringing it up because I found it to be so odd that Michael would praise him for this in such a way, almost making it sound like Rob is now professing his faith in Christ. And I was
Yeah.
like, I don't get that, Mike, but okay,
And part of it might be, and part of it might be personal experience and all the things. And again, that's what's so great about the music.
exactly. All right. So, one thing I did want to say about Invincible Shield, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm listening to this album, I'm listening to the guitar solos, and I'm like, while I believe that Glenn Tipton may have participated in the songwriting of this album,
Yeah.
I cannot believe that he participated in the actual physical recording of this album. I don't know. I don't know how
Yeah.
you think about it.
I mean, he might have participated in the recording of the album. I don't know, but
Well, I'm pretty sure
I
he
mean,
was there.
just based on what we know about his health, like obviously there's a big barrier there where he's probably not doing a lot of the recording himself. But um
I think there's a lot more Andy Sneap.
yeah,
I
I
don't.
mean this is the first album that Andy Sneap recorded additional guitars on. So, at least that have been publicized. So, I mean, we don't really know who the hell records a lot of the stuff. I've listened to different producers say like half the band didn't even record half these albums. Like
Oh,
so.
I know. I
um,
mean, I personally think that Richie Faulkner played, I would say,
most
almost 75 to 90% of the album.
I would say probably so.
And guitar solo wise, like I'm listening to the guitar solos, and there's a distinct effort to make the solos sound different. But, and I think he's trying to make it sound like Glenn Tipton's playing, and maybe he is. I can't take anything away from Glenn. Maybe he is, but like there's one that sounds like almost like a Stratocaster kind of sound compared to Richie's Les Paul kind of sound.
Mhm.
And I say it that way because anybody out there who knows the difference between the two guitars, Yngwie Malmsteen plays a Fender Stratocaster. It has a very fluid sound. A
Yeah.
Telecaster has a very fluid sound, where Les Pauls, typically famous for the fact that they have humbucker pickups, have a very, for lack of a better term, very raunchy kind of sound. And so you can hear that in certain songs that's on this album, and it's I can't sit there and say, oh no, that's not Glenn or that is Glenn, but I think in some cases it's not, and it's an attempt to sound like Glenn.
It could be. I really
But
don't
it's neither
know.
here nor there. I mean, Glenn's going to get his name on it no matter what. He's part of the band, and he is, you know, pretty much besides Rob Halford, the heart and soul of Judas Priest. You know, so that's that. All right, what do you got? We're in top 5 territory.
All right, so my number 5 is Defenders of the Faith. Um, Free Will Burning, Jawbreaker, The Sentinel, Eat Me Alive. Um, I like Love Bites quite a bit too. It's really the second half of the album that is, I think, kind of a slump, especially like and the Defenders of the Faith outro is kind of iconic to me, but it's also just repetitive singing defenders. We are defenders of the faith. We are defenders of the faith. Over and over again. And some heads are gonna roll is decent as well. I think I liked it more when I was younger, but now I'm just kind of like a little bored of it. But the Sentinel is one of my favorite Judas Priest songs. Period. I think Free Will Burning is just one of those, again, to use the word, iconic songs. Always like Jawbreaker. I'm amused by what the song's about now because I didn't
Mhm.
know for the longest time. Um, but yeah, like awesome song, or awesome album. Definitely a top 5 for me. This to me is probably Dave Holland's best performance, but that's debatable with Screaming for Vengeance. But you know, again, I think he fits more in the earlier albums. I mean, I would love to hear like what Scott Travis would have done with this album. So
Oh my God. I mean, Free Will Burning would have been a completely different song,
yeah,
you know. Um, it's not here. We're not there yet for me, so I'll talk a little bit more about it when I get there.
okay.
So number 5 for me is Firepower. Um, Coming off of Redeemer of Souls and going into Firepower, having that break in between that they had. I mean, we're talking about 4 years. Um, Absolutely, amazing album for what it was at the time and for what it still is. It's just to be able to put an album out this strong, this late into your career, very much like an Invincible Shield. It's amazing, But that's the Richie Faulkner uh, effect because he's breathed life into these guys that they didn't have before. They were just getting stale. They were just kind of moving along. They were just smelling their farts and coming up with Nostradamus. you know? And this album, I mean, to me, Firepower is just amazing. I like the song Firepower, Lightning Strike. Evil Never Dies. You didn't like Never the Heroes so much, but that's one of those kinds of mid-tempo, almost ballady songs that it just there's a lot of meaning behind it, and I think that it comes across well.
Hmm.
Necromancer is a pretty cool song for me. I do like Spectre, and I do like No Surrender. No Surrender is really cool. It's got a really good melody to it.
Yeah, I like that one.
Got a good hook. So I mean, that's a strong album. So I really like it. That is my number 5.
All right. Well, my number 4 is Invincible Shield. It really surprised me because I wasn't expecting to like it as much as I do. And I'm not really counting the bonus tracks again, but I do like the Lodger. I think it's a cool song. It's just, to me, it's a bonus track, especially like that one. Um, but as far as the main album, I love Panic Attack. I listened to it a ton before the album even came out because it was a, one of the singles they released. The Serpent and the King's really cool. Invincible Shield, I really like that. Like that's a great. I was impressed because sometimes for me like their title tracks, if there even are title tracks in rare instances from Judas Priest, but they're not as like always my favorite. But like this one, I thought kicked a lot of ass. As God is My Witness is really cool. Crown of Horns, I do like. It took a little bit for that one to grow on me. I know it's only been like a month, but lyrical content I think was a big factor in me appreciating that song. Trial by Fire is my favorite song on the album. I really like that one. Sons of Thunder's really cool. Giants in the Sky. Like this is what I wanted out of Judas Priest. And then you mentioned like the Andy Sneap effect. Like we talk about that, like where every album he produces, the drums sound the same. Like this is one of the few that it's starting to get away from that, like you said. So I really appreciated that. The solos are great on the whole album. Like for me, I really like the heavy metallic sound of Judas Priest, and this you know really pleasantly surprised me. So I I was just really shocked to have it as a number 4. But when I evaluate these in a certain way, and how many songs I like, how many you know how many songs I dislike, which there aren't a whole lot on this whole list for me actually, which is crazy. And what the merit of my favorite songs, the production, the quality of playing, you know um all those aspects factor into it, and for me it's still like with all those stats it came up as number 4.
That's pretty wild because That's high up there, you
Yeah.
know. And like I said, I don't think it's as strong as Firepower, but you think it's much stronger than Firepower.
Yeah, a few albums ahead. Firepower for me was 8. This is number 4. So I think Firepower suffers especially from that Andy Sneap sound to me, and it's unfortunate because I think it's a really cool album, but um, and also like a lot of things are about when it hits you. I mean, Firepower came out pretty rough time for me, so there may be feelings there, etc. So yeah.
Right. I totally understand that. All right. So number 4 for me is Painkiller. And I know that's not your number 4 or 3 or whatever.
Blasphemy, I say. No, I
No,
mean it's in your top 4, so I'm good.
right. No, Painkiller. Um, man, it's so funny because it's hard to sit there and say it's a return to form because
No, it's not
right,
because
it's
it's the
not
first
because
one that
there was
ever sounded
nothing.
like
There was
that. Yeah.
exactly there's nothing like that before. But if you're going to talk about, oh well, they did Screaming for Vengeance and they did Defenders of the Faith. Firepower, uh, Painkiller is like it's not a natural progression, but it's a progression that you can see, moving towards when you look at the lineage of things in history. Okay, you don't see it going, Screaming for Vengeance, Defenders of the Faith, and then Turbo. You don't see that coming. It's like what? Wrong way. You go,
Imagine if Turbo had come out after Painkiller.
oh
Like,
God, that would have been a career ender. Um, but I look at it more as like a rebirth for Judas Priest, and the whole thing centers around Scott Travis. Scott Travis coming into the band, basically much like the Richie Faulkner effect. This is the Scott Travis effect. They now have new life because they have so many things they can now do with their rhythm section that they were not able to do before. Which astonishes me that they actually held on to Dave Holland for so long. Like you went through so many different drummers in the 70s, but you had to hold on to Dave Holland from 1979 all the way to 1989. Really?
right?
You basically for 10 years you had to hold on to this guy. You couldn't find somebody else, that was more adept and to playing the style of music that you played. I don't know. So Painkiller, amazing. Obviously the title track is just without comparison. It has nobody else that it goes. It's such a fucking good song. Hell Patrol, All Guns Blazing, Leather Rebel. A Touch of Evil is such a cool song. It's a slow song, but just it's very, very heavy. And I like that. Nightcrawler, Between the Hammer and an Anvil. I mean, it's got a lot of good songs in it. I like it. I know you have more words that you're going to say about it, so I'm going to go ahead and let's move on to number 3 from this point.
So I do want to say something. Like
Uh-huh.
now, like being such a wrestling fan and everything, like I can't help but think like Between the Hammer and the Anvil is like Jim the Anvil Neidhart and Greg the Hammer Valentine. Like you getting smashed. Like
Absolutely. So, real quick, going back to the album, Don Airey played keyboards. Everyone knows Don Airey from the Ozzy Osbourne band. He's now in Deep Purple, and they also know him from Rainbow. But his uh, his addition and adding the mini Moog to as a bass part on this album is amazing. Just the depths of bass that this album gets is so fucking cool. So just wanted to add that on there. Okay, number 3.
Angel of Retribution. Um, I love this album. I think it's an amazing follow up to Painkiller. It's 15 years later, but this is Rob coming back into the band, and they they really picked up where they left off. And I think that's what really does it for me. I remember picking this one up and just absolutely falling in love with it because I do love Painkiller so much. Judas Rising, Deal with the Devil, Revolution, Worth Fighting for, Demonizer, Wheels of Fire, Hell, Angel. I like a lot. It's a soft song, but it really shows a different side of Rob that we hadn't heard in a while. And then Hellrider, I think is great. Eulogy, that's where it drops off a little bit for me. And Loch Ness, I think to me, it's the worst song on the album.
Loch Ness is the sniff and fart
Yeah, yes. But Demonizer is my favorite song on the album. It's kind of like a follow up to Painkiller. And one thing I like about this album too is it's like not only is the band back in its truest form. Scott Travis is firing on all cylinders, but also there's lots of references to their earlier music, and Rob had these epic heroes that he would sing about, characters like the Painkiller and the Sentinel and stuff like that, where the Demonizer is a follow-up to the Painkiller. I mean, there's a line in the song, "The Painkiller rises again." There's all these things that if you listen to it, there's references throughout their entire career. And I love that. Like, let's pay homage to ourselves, but also, if you've been listening to the lore of the music, it's all there. I just loved it. I mean, 2005, I'm graduated from high school. I'm exploring the world, driving my car, going to CD stores that are music stores that existed at the time, and like this to me was one of those moments where I'm connecting it with my life, but also just loving the music because I was such a big fan of Painkiller. So yeah, super high for me, but it may not be for everybody, but I love it.
I can see your point. I can see your point. If Loch Ness was only like a 3-minute song, this would have been a 45-minute album.
Hey, at least it's the last track on the album.
Oh my
A
God.
lot of people didn't even get to it. So
No. See, but that's the thing. You're only 40 minutes into the album, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, that's not bad, and you've already listened to 9 songs. It's like a perfect length. And then Loch Ness just drags on.
really
Like I was listening to it in the car because, researching this out, this episode. And I'm like, I think I went to like 3 stores and the shit was still playing. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? And I tell you what, the associated lyrics with the history, as much as Rob did that on the album, I really think that's the Roy Z effect. Because Roy, he did that with the Halford band and the song Resurrection. And so I think Roy Z kind of may have encouraged him to do something like that for this album, so who knows? I mean, that's just speculation, but I think that's what happened there, which is nothing wrong with that. It's pretty cool.
I agree.
All right. So number 3 for me is going to be British Steel. So, obviously you and I come from 2 different eras. So I was a Priest fan well before you were born. So growing up in the time that I did, albums like these considered heavy metal, it wasn't odd. It wasn't strange. It wasn't out of the ordinary. As someone who got into Priest with Screaming for Vengeance, and I knew songs like Living After Midnight. When I first time I heard it, or first time that I recognized it, I'm like, I've heard that song before. Did I hear that on the radio? But that's a pretty cool song. And then Breaking the Law, it's just such a cool riff. It was the other songs, once I got to listen to them, I was like, oh, this is a pretty good album. And yes, it has some questionable things on it. United is just terrible. But when you think you also have to look at it in retrospect of the time period in which it came out. right? So then, as it's still cheesy, but the cheese is not as ooey gooey as it seems now, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it doesn't bother me because one, I'm okay with cheesy stuff, but I also like grew up in the area of the era of Hulkamania, right?
Right.
So I'm a real American. That doesn't bother me because I appreciate the country I live in, whether it's done bad things or not. Um, everything in history has. So, you know, I'm
Right.
I'm just gonna leave it on that, um, but yeah, I don't mind those kind of things. So United doesn't like offend me morally or anything like that. I think it's still a fine song.
Right. No, look, Breaking the Law, Rapid Fire, great song. Metal Gods, great song. Grinder is a grinding kind of song, not in a bad way per se, but
Looking for
it's
me.
exactly. I mean, it's got a cool riff, cool melody, So it's one of those songs that you kind of like, okay, I see, I see you, Grinder. United, absolute cheese. Living After Midnight, just a classic. I appreciate You Don't Have to Be Old to Be Wise. I think to put that many songs into a title and to have to put that into the chorus, uh, they didn't do a bad job.
Yeah, it's
um,
it's fine. It's not one that like I just go out of my way to listen to, but it's
no, right,
fine.
exactly. And then Rage and the Steeler. Those, I mean, Steeler's a very good song. I love that. So yeah, this is a great album, and when you look at it in the context of the history of the band, it's such an important album. Um,
Yeah,
it
for
is
sure.
basically everything that Judas Priest had done up to that point is what brought this album together. They knew that they had to come together with something really strong because they had put, you know, the what I was been calling the trilogy of albums in the mid 70s, and they were building up to that. And then all of a sudden, Unleashed in the East, breaks through. It's a big album for them. Now what? And they were able to do it, and they did something that crossed over and appealed to a lot of people. So it was definitely a turning point in their career. It was a turning point in the decade. It was the beginning of the decade. So at the time, 1980, it was a huge album.
Agreed. I mean, it's one of those landmark albums in metal history, but also just a landmark for the band. Like career defining album is the way I'd
Correct.
put it. All right. So my number two is Screaming for Vengeance. Um, this is one of those albums that like is nearly perfect. There's really nothing I can take away from it. From beginning to end, I don't skip a track. The Hellion, Electric Eye, such an awesome, paired combo for an opening. Riding on the Wind, so cool. Bloodstone, it's stepped down, but it's still a really cool song. Take These Chains, again, like I really like it, but it's not one of my favorites. Pain and Pleasure, same. Screaming for Vengeance, man, that song just blows me away every time. You Got Another Thing Coming, it's fine. It's one of those, like I said, it's a staple song. It's great at a concert. It's just not it like for me. It's a step back into like the earlier era of Judas Priest, especially as like how heavy this album is. Um, Fever's cool, and Devil's Child is a great closer. For me, Screaming for Vengeance and probably Hellion, The Electric Eye, and Riding on the Wind are probably all my favorite collective songs on that album. Maybe Screaming for Vengeance a little bit more than the rest. But man, this is just like this is a two-time platinum album for a reason. Like it kicks so much ass. I'm actually shocked sometimes that it's not like it didn't sell way more than it has, especially for like who Judas Priest is, and this to me is the defining album for the band.
I'm surprised it didn't sell more, but I'm also surprised that my number two album didn't sell more.
Okay.
My number two album is Defenders of the Faith. So we're going back to back with two really good albums here.
Mhm.
You talked a little bit earlier about Defenders. That was your number 5 album. Still top 5 for you. I mean, coming off of Screaming for Vengeance, coming off such a strong album. Like I said, a year later, you you're watching MTV. They say, "Hey, we got the premiere of the new Judas Priest album after this commercial break," and they play the new Judas Priest song. They play Free Will Burning, and man, it just blows you away. And then the whole see, this is one of those videos that go along with the song kind of thing. You're playing a car racing game, and I've played that game countless times when I was a kid. That's in the video. Um, you can't control the damn car because it's just a shitty ass video game from back in the day. Some people out there probably says, "Well, I can do. I mastered the
There's
game." Yeah,
probably somebody that like
yeah.
speed runs that game,
Oh
but
yeah, but and the thing is, I just didn't want to keep putting hundreds of dollars into that game. Anyway, um, so it goes so well with the song. But I mean, like you said, Free Will Burning, Jawbreaker, Rock Hard, Right Free, The Sentinel. The first side is just amazing. To me, side 2 doesn't let up until it gets past Some Heads Are Gonna Roll. Love Bites, Eat Me Alive, Some Heads Are Gonna Roll. Yes, that's the most commercial sounding song on the album. Guess what? It's the only song that's not written by Judas Priest. It's written by Bob Halligan Jr. And Bob Halligan has had a long career associated with Judas Priest, so much so that they have a song on the new album, Invincible Shield, that is by Bob Halligan. And I can't figure out what song it is because the way that they have the book, it says it has asterisks. Bob Halligan Jr. Can't find where in the world the asterisk is in the fucking credits anywhere. I may be missing it or something, but if someone can figure it out, send us an email or drop us a comment. I don't know where it's at. But anyway,
talking to you, Bob Halligan Jr.
but you know what? It's so weird. Again, doing the research for this album, that song, Some Heads Are Gonna Roll, has been earwormed in my head for weeks. I keep waking up in the middle of the night and all I'm hearing is the lyrics to Some Heads Are Gonna Roll. And I'm like, golly, can this stop already? And I go to listen to the song and it still comes back. I agree with you. Defenders of the Faith drones on and on and on. But that whole
But it's the closer, like, and it's fine in that regard. Like, if it was in the middle of the album, I'd be like, "This sucks."
oh yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes from heavy duty to Defenders. It's just one of those things that Judas Priest has always done. They literally are defenders of the heavy metal faith, and they will write a song that will defend it to the core. And it is just ever since Metal Gods, it's just such a weird thing that they have done throughout their career. But this album, it's a classic, and it's excellent from top to bottom.
All right, so number one and the only true number one there can ever be. No, I'm just playing. For me, is Painkiller. To me, this is a perfect album. I do not skip a track on it. I love every inch of it from beginning to end. Painkiller is just one of those songs that will always stick with me. Like, I hope one day if I do have kids and I'm retired and I'm elderly and they're like, "Grandpa, can you play me a song from when you were a child?" And I'll be like, "This is a little ditty from Judas Priest," and but like every song, like for me, they tell such elaborate stories. Painkiller, Hell Patrol, All Guns Blazing, Leather Rebel, Metal Meltdown, Nightcrawler, Between the Hammer and the Anvil, Touch of Evil. Even the instrumental lead up to the last track, Battle Hymn, is cool, and One Shot at Glory. I mean, I love every single song on this album. I love the characters he paints. When he's singing about it, every riff is so good. Like, this to me is Judas Priest, how I want to hear Judas Priest. Like I said, I mean, a lot of my love for Angel of Retribution comes from my love for Painkiller. So And I think Invincible Shield to me is like the next closest that follows in that same vein. Screaming for Vengeance is a different album, and it's perfect on its own too, like in its own era, in its own right. But like the Painkiller stuff, like I just love it. I mean, I have the shirt. I'm actually wearing it right now. Like funny enough. And Scott Travis comes on following the Dave Holland era of the band, and just like it's so funny. I bought this album and it just sat there for like probably a couple months. And I remember because I was on this like quest to find every metal album I could find, and it just sat there for a while. And then I remember loading it in my CD player and just being like, why the hell did I wait so long for this? Like, like I had it in my CD player for like ever after this. So, yeah, I mean, I have untold love for this album.
I can tell, and that's a good thing. It's a good album. I mean, nothing to take away from this album. It's the reason, or it's because you and I are so different in our generations and the eras that we grew up, that had I come a couple years later, I probably would. This would probably be that album. Like if I didn't grow up in that MTV early '80s era, this album probably would be it. But it's not. My number one album is Screaming for Vengeance. You considered Painkiller a perfect album. This one I would say near perfect. And I'd say Fever is probably the weakest song on the album for me. And even then I can listen to it. I can listen to this album top to bottom. I can listen to Defenders top to bottom, even though I think Defenders is absolutely weak. But I mean,
even
iconic.
the song Defenders.
Yeah, the song Defenders.
Yeah, no, I got you. I was like, what? I'll listen to it top to bottom. I put it in my number 2, but I think it's a weak album.
No,
I got you.
So, I mean, it's a classic. The Hellion Electric Eye. You can't play one without the other. Although it's probably easier to do this than, let's say, what's another one that goes back to back like that? Damn, what's another one that does that? We Are the Champions and We Will Rock You.
Oh yeah, like you can't. If you separate those, you're a monster.
So hold on. So the Hellion Electric Eye. I mean, it's just they're inseparable. Although you can play Electric Eye by itself, but it almost feels like you left something off. But unlike with Queen, you have to play We Are the Champions along with We Will Rock You. Otherwise, it's completely sacrilegious. Although, if you do that, you can't do that on your playlist unless you somehow figure out a way to put the two songs together. Otherwise, you put on your playlist and shit, your playlist separates them. Your playlist is evil. It's evil. Yeah. Riding on the Wind, amazing song. Bloodstone, cool song. Take These Chains Off, Bob Halligan Jr. song. Pain and Pleasure, heavy, slow, plodding song. And then Screaming for Vengeance just rips your face off. Golly, it's such an amazing song. I mean, Judas Priest. Rob Halford just at the top of his voice the whole time. I mean, it's just amazing. And that's the thing I like about You Got Another Thing Coming and how it fits into this album. You go from this extreme, like almost a genre-defining kind of song, Screaming for Vengeance, and you go into this, You Got Another Thing Coming. It literally, when you listen to the song, it has all this stuff going on at the end, and it goes, and it goes into the riff for You Got Another Thing Coming. I just love that transition. And I just mentioned it, this is like a genre-defining song. I actually think, and I was thinking about this today, heavy metal, when you listen to this album, and then this album in particular, there's something about it that says this is heavy metal. also another album similar to that. Like when you listen to Back in Black, you listen to the album and there's something about it. I mean, that, most people nowadays will categorize that as a hard rock album. But in the middle, early 80s, that was heavy metal. I mean, Back in Black and those riffs are so much heavier than the stuff that's on Highway to Hell. It's wild how it stands alone. And AC/DC changed their sound from that point forward. But that album, Judas Priest Screaming for Vengeance, there's something about the sound of those albums that just say metal. Iron Maiden's what you call Peace of Mind. There's something about the way that it's recorded, the way it's played, or something. It makes it like, Master of Puppets is a thrash album, and it's a career defining album. But these other albums, Vengeance, Peace of Mind, Back in Black, they have a better production than Master of Puppets. So there's something about them that just sound so amazing. And I'm not trying to put Master of Puppets down, but I'm trying to prop these up that much higher. So it's just weird to me that in that regards. But Screaming for Vengeance.
You heard it here. He's a Metallica hater now.
Oh yeah, that's right. I'm a Metallica hater. Me, the guy with the Metallica tattoo.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's our Judas Priest worst to first. 17-1, all the Rob Halford albums. And now we're going to shift over to our big four, Tim Ripper Owen, quote unquote, Priest albums. So we're going to be basically doing the two KK's Priest albums and the two Judas Priest Ripper albums. And this is where we're going to start shuffling them around and saying which one's better than the next. All right. So since I went first, since you went first, I'm going to go first with my take on the big four Ripper albums. That way you can end off with that. All right. So for me, number 4 is KK's Priest's The Sinner Rides Again, which is the second album from KK and from Ripper. Let me talk about number 3, Sermons of the Sinner, which is the debut album of KK's Priest. So you put these two albums together. I think it's not progressively better so much as KK's, the first album, I guess, Sermons of the Sinner, is just a stronger album in general. The one thing I don't like about either one of the two albums is that there's not a lot of dynamics in the song. When I say that, I mean you don't have a lot of change. You don't go from, you don't have a truly slow song. You don't have a truly methodical, head banging, slow plodding song. Most every song has a pace or faster throughout.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of the intros are shorter, but there's not a lot of diversity. That's the word I was looking for. There's not a lot of diversity in the songs from one album to the next. I think there's less diversity in the second album. So, but otherwise, performance-wise, I mean, there's some great performances on there. I mean, Ripper is singing his ass off. KK is playing his ass off. It's not Les Binks on drums that they thought originally? Who was the drummer?
He did a live show or something like that.
Yeah,
not live show.
It was supposed to be Les though, right?
Yeah, something like that.
It's not him on drums.
No, it's Sean Elg on drums, and he's a really good drummer.
Oh, I'm not taking anything away from the drummer. It's just saying it's not Les Binks.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And then so number 2 for me would be Jugulator from Judas Priest. That is the first Ripper album for Judas Priest. It's got some cool songs on it. Bloodstained and Bullet Train are the ones that stand out the most to me. However, in my opinion, I think Demolition is the better of the two Ripper Judas Priest albums. I I like One on One and I like Bloodsuckers the most out of those two albums. I think there's the most, I guess, from front to back, most well thought out album between that and Jugulator. So that's why that is my number one Tim Ripper Owens Judas Priest album, or quote unquote Priest album.
Priest album. Yeah. Okay. Well, our lists are a little bit different, but
It's got the same
they
four
have the
albums.
same four albums. Crazy, right? Um, so my number four is actually your number one, Demolition. I remember when this one came out, and I just was a little bummed by it for some reason. Like it didn't do it for me. It's like them, stepping into industrial, and I've never been much of an industrial guy. So like if you could get past that and you enjoy some aspects of that, then like this will be more for you. That being said, I still like three of the songs. I like One on One, Bloodsuckers, and Metal Messiah. Metal Messiah is my favorite on the album. Feed on Me is probably my least favorite. But it was huge step down from Jugulator for me. My number three is The Sinner Rides Again. Sons of the Sentinel, Reap the Whirlwind, One More Shot at Glory. I like all those. The rest, kind of like what you said, like there's no real ebbs and flows. Like everything's kind of like at the same pace. I didn't really care for Pledge Your Souls all that much. Really, most of the second half of the album, just not as big into it. Hymn 66 is okay, but that's like, to me, the biggest thing is like it's just like one pace the whole way through. Sermons of the Sinner is my number two. Hellfire Thunderbolt is probably my favorite song on that album, but I like Sermons of the Sinner, Raise Your Fist, Brothers of the Road, Hail to the Priest, and Return of the Sentinel. So pretty much everything else I'm fine with. I think it's a decent album, but definitely way better than The Sinner Rides Again. It's if you are a fan of KK's writing, I think you'll find something to enjoy. Even if you just I only listen to Rob Halford version, and I think there's definitely people out there that are like that. But I grew up in an era where Tim Ripper Owens was the singer of Judas Priest. That was kind of like my early years of the band. So my perceptions may be a little different. And you can probably figure out my number one is Jugulator. That's, to me, Jugulator's another like perfect album. I don't mean it's better than anything, other bands or anything like that, but it's one of those albums that I can listen to from front to back, and I pretty much love every song on it. Jugulator being, it's not my favorite, but it's a great opener to me. Bloodstain, Dead Meat, Death Row, Decapitate. You get the idea. It's a lot about death. Burn in Hell, though, is my absolute favorite song in the album. Abductors is probably the weakest to me. But I enjoy every bit of this album. I know it's different, and it's got its detractors for sure. But like, this is a heavy, dark album, and it's right up my alley.
I figured it was going to be somewhere around that. I knew Jugulator was probably going to be your best, your number one. This is so funny. So in the United States, this album, it says the label here is SPV, but if I'm not mistaken, this album came out on CMC International here in the States. And CMC International in the mid 90s was basically very similar to what's that Italian record company that basically is putting out albums now? God, I can't remember. Oh, Frontier Records, where they didn't have a lot of money to go out and give bands a recording budget. So what they did was, they like, you bring us the album and we'll put it out for you, kind of thing. And that's how they got a lot of their acts. Some of the acts in the 90s just weren't able to get a recording contract. Overkill was one of the bands that signed a deal with CMC International. And so their budget being so low, and I don't know if it affected this, but this album cover for Jugulator is so bad as far as the pixelation, And I think you and I talked about it once before, and you may have had a different take on that.
It's supposed to be pixelated, which it doesn't read to most people that that's the case, and that's the problem. Because if you look at it, the pixelation is even, which is a telltale sign as a graphic designer that's intentional. So it doesn't read correctly. I think it's a cool image, but I don't know why it needed to be pixelated.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is like, sometimes you forego some of those gimmicky things as a designer because nobody gets it, and that's kind of the problem.
Right. And then you got Sinner Rides Again. Okay. Let me pull this up because you're going to laugh when I tell you about this. But look up Grim Reaper and their studio album called See You in Hell. And you can look at the album cover for See You in Hell and then look at the album cover for Sinner Rides Again. It's not the same, obviously, but there's a distinct similarity between the two. Even to the point of, the font and the old school font that they use. It's just so funny. The first time I saw this album cover, I'm like, that looks a lot like Grim Reaper's See You in Hell. And it's really funny. There's nothing.
It's funny because I just watched a short documentary on Grim Reaper yesterday. That's a band we should talk about at some point. Like they had some great stuff and weird history. But
yeah, that goes along with the Troubled Bands that you were talking about.
There you go. Oh yeah, very similar. Like different pose, different not really different pose. Let me rephrase that. But different pose of the rider.
Yeah, different pose of the horse is the same.
The horse is kind of the same. Yeah,
really, the rider. Similar. It's very similar, and the fact that they both have like the old English kind of style font, it's just so funny, And I'm like, the first time I saw it, I'm like, that's eerily familiar to me.
It could have been a reference. Like the artist may have oh, that's cool. Here's a visual reference. Who knows?
And I do know that The Sinner is obviously KK's biggest song, so he runs with that, and then
I thought you were going to say The Sinner was like Nick Bocott or
no, The Sinner Rides Again.
Steve Grimmett's The Sinner,
and it's funny because KK is running and basically piggybacking off of songs that he's written in the past, or Return of the Sentinel, Hail for the Priest, Sermons of the Sinner. Although I like Hellfire and Thunderbolt, but all those song titles are obviously references from stuff that he's done with Judas Priest.
Yeah.
And then for the second album, The Sinner Rides Again, obviously that's him, back out there again. So and then the Sons of the Sentinel. So, sometimes you just kind of got to stop doing that. But
like I said, it doesn't bother me. I mean, I enjoy like the references to the past. But that being said, like I get why it would, some people might not like it. But I'm just glad KK's doing his thing and he's still writing some really cool riffs. So,
although I watched a video, I forgot what song it was. Oh no, you know what? I was watching on Spotify, so I keep repeating the same video every like 5 seconds, and I could have swore that KK was wearing the same outfit that he did during the Screaming for Vengeance tour, but I could be wrong. Anyway, all right. Well, that's our big four.
It probably still fit him. He's probably a small dude. Yeah,
he is. All right. Well, that's our big four Ripper Owens Priest related albums, and that brings an end to this episode of Debating Metal. As a reminder, while you're on your favorite podcast platform, leave a review and rate us so we know how we're doing.
And to interact with us, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and our new X account, or send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. If you listen to us on YouTube, be sure to leave us a comment and ring that bell to be notified when we post a new episode. And remember to tune in to the next episode when we spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.